Hello?
Yes, it's recording.
Okay. All right. Hello. Hi, Dimitri. How are you today?
Hello. Fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Well, I wanted I wanted to just have a conversation um about the differences between the shadow and darkness, things that aren't the shadow, and the confusion around that, because I think I think there is a lot of confusion around it, and it's dangerous when it's not understood. And so I just wanted to have a conversation about that, and just talk it out. And this morning, someone shared a dream with me where there were yin and yang fish in a bathtub full of water in my home, and there were people there, and I was showing and explaining to them there was one black fish and one white fish that were alive and swimming around in the bathtub in the water. And there was another fish that was black and was dead. And it was like a fake fish. And I was explaining to all the people what that meant, and explaining what it was. And what it means is the when the yin and yang are together and touching as they were in the bathtub, in the washing water, the real washing, then the upside down anti self is dead, and it is a fake self. And it gets filled with, when the yin and yang are split apart, it gets filled with a darkness that isn't yin and yang, it isn't the shadow. And I think that kind of gets the gist of what we're talking about today.
Yes, very, very much so. That really sort of, gets the whole thing in a nutshell. And yeah, it's very important. Thank you for sharing that because it's very, very important that we have this conversation and record it because there has been indeed, I think since Carl Jung, there has been a lot of misunderstanding, regarding shadow, and Jung himself said things that could have, that many have, according to me, misinterpreted, things like, um, you need to embrace your darkness, and
Yes,
that,
and your inner demons, and using that language even to talk about it is
exactly.
tricky, because demons are different than your shadow.
Exactly, because and then it becomes very tricky, and also one needs to be very, contextual about, what demons are you talking about? Or do you mean,
Hmm.
most people would, refer to their inner, the stuff they need to confront as demons, but that immediately sets the the setting, makes the setting that you can also then turn that into literal demons, and that's
Hmm.
the gray zone that we see, that has been capitalized upon. And in the new age, in the new age, approaches to Jung and to shadow work, embrace the demon, meaning, and
Yes.
then they embrace the literal demon, and then embrace the literal, dark. And, so it's very, yeah, I'm very happy with that, that we are trying to set the record straight, if I can put it like that, because there is a lot of shadow work out there. As a matter of fact, it's become like a major thing, on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
If you Google shadow work. But I think that it's not a coincidence that eventually, that in this time that this would happen, because as you said in the beginning, it's exactly the way of cutting off the real shadow that leads to the dark, the real
Mm-hmm.
darkness, and the real possession.
Yes, but like everything, we've been programmed and conditioned to make everything black and white and all or nothing. And so it's like, there are religious groups that want everything to be the devil. The devil did it, and that's it, and it's all that, and there's no psychological work, or you know wanting to believe that everything's shadow. And real psychology is like psycho spiritual. It's both. You can't have just the mind or just the spiritual. They're intertwined, and it's hard because that's a different way of looking at things than everyone is used to. And like you said, it's gray, and we're not accustomed to the gray zone, black and white and all or nothing. And it isn't. It real psychology is both.
Absolutely, and exactly, and this is why, I think the so you see it in the church where the people use God, as a way to not deal with shadow.
Mm-hmm.
There's the so-called spiritual bypassing, where we put it all in God's hand.
But also put it all on Jesus to carry.
Exactly.
Give
Exactly.
Jesus everything to carry, and that's not the
Right.
real way.
Right. Well, and it is the way to get people to not carry their shadow, and to cut it off.
Yeah,
So
the
so
upside
and
down
then
way.
exactly, and I've had like a few lives or something where I said that this has been a way to get people to cut off their shadow. So there is this huge need to deal with shadow first, and then the deeper spiritual levels. But on the other hand, you have then the shadow work people who do see this, but then they continue via some form of shadow work, and then they go into a more scientific framework, and then they deny the spiritual. So
Yeah.
you have on both sides, you have how you have the spiritualists who will bypass the shadow, put it all on Jesus or God, and then you have the other, so the more classical Jungians, who will sort of you go into shadow but then deny the spiritual dimension.
Yes. And there
Yes.
can also be a way um, to look at the shadow either in more analytical terms and like overanalyze, but it's not the um, internalizing and the feeling aspect too.
Exactly. No, exactly, because the the those that go on to sort of navigate this too scientifically, the shadow work, and they try to merge it with the new sciences, quantum physics and all of that. They go on in a much too analytical way about it, and they get lost in what we call the observation problem. Meaning, they defend, because science basically is locked in the observation problem. If you look at science really deeply from a shadow work perspective, because a theory is basically a projection.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very hard, as you said, to not black or white this, and to really tread on the edge, because the true shadow work is not yet the spiritual layers, which do come once we have done the shadow work. And then, because it's not going into the observation problem. That's, I think, when Jung died, and he left it to von Franz as his successor, and then she died. And I remember, a lot of, maybe people don't know this, but I was supposed to meet her in Holland. There was a conference organized, in which she was for her, and then I was invited to talk about my dreams, because that's when I was already dreaming, having these big dreams, and she never showed up. Long story short, I didn't go either because of that. But the night, just very soon after that, because she got sick, that she passed away, that night I dreamt with her. I didn't know at the time that she had passed, that when I had that dream, but then I was informed, and then it all fit together. And in the dream, she was crying, and she had a lot of pain, but her big pain was that there was no succession at that point, And so after that, I think that the Jungian work, which is, no matter what, that's where the shadow work, comes from, went somewhat lost. There was a fragmentation in the whole Jungian movement, because there was no successor, like no appointed or, official successor.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got like a lot of different streams of shadow work. You have the group that went into science with it, and then you have the group that went into the more new age and etc. So that's an important part of the story, that a lot of it went. There was no real leadership after von Franz, and that's where we are today. In that landscape, where there are many versions of it, to not even mention those in the new age who are actively pursuing the agenda of confusing the shadow for darkness.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm glad that we're having this conversation and bringing it up, because it's the shadow work is everything. I mean, that's our true immunity and true protection. And if you don't know that, or you're misunderstanding it or doing it upside down, it can be really, really dangerous, and I think too, in the world we are in now, we also are very always wanting, this instant fix. And so I'll look at my shadow on a weekend workshop and it'll all be better. And so that ends up, maybe uncovering some shadow, but then either reprogramming or cutting it off to fix it, have a happy ending in a weekend or something. And it isn't like, the real shadow work. I mean, it's a way of life, it's wanting to know myself, wanting to cut through the lies and get to the truth and get to the core. And you can't do that in a weekend.
That's it, exactly. And that is you see, that now touches again on a whole host of approaches, if you wish. Because you have that group, you have those groups that have their own framework, and then they add it on as a supplement, exactly what you say. You get the weekend training and all of that. I think I made a video about the whole Ken Wilber approach, where I think I said that it was, they looked at it as supplemental, important but supplemental.
The shadow.
Like a piece of the work, but then sort of subjected, to the other stuff, because they go into the more mindfulness thing, and and then you have the branch of to go into science with it, to turn it into a branch of science would be to use it to study the world. While, as you well said a second ago, the whole thing is a way to find out who you are. It's self. It's a way to become aware of self, and not, to go back into trying to understand the world out there. And that's another, and this is why, I think what we have been doing, I think, and you have been extremely, extremely incredible at this, if I may say this, Meredith, but what we have been doing has been, I think, a return to the true Jungian spirit, regarding the work, which is a way, individuation is a way to find self inwardly, and that's the big thing. That's the big thing. It's not a supplement to other mindfulness approaches. It's not another scientific department, because that's where you get the Pauli-Jung collaboration, in which Pauli wanted to sort of take Jungian psychology into physics, give it like a spot within physics. And Jung, see, so obviously, and then at the end, Pauli sort of went his own way back into physics, because the true work would require, if you wish, a complete surrender to the way to self. That's another part of the false shadow work, is that it's done, and then you get even a whole lot of shadow can be uncovered in dreams and all of that, but it's still done in service of another part of the self, but not in service of a true surrender to the core. It's done. It's sort of done via another altar, but and then you get that it then needs to serve some other interest. But I think that the true spirit of Jung was that this is the thing itself. The journey to the self is the main thing, and everything else is. Meredith, that's what I have been seeing throughout all these years of developing it, is that it changes everything. It is the main thing, because you know what I mean? It is the main thing. Exactly.
I know. And if it's not the main thing, anything and everything can be and will be used to run away from the shadow and make it look like I'm doing shadow work, but I'm not, because the mindfulness can be a way to bliss out and not feel anything. You know, if you don't, if you're not really grounded and solid in your shadow, everything, anything can be used to run away from it and cover it up, and that's really dangerous, really dangerous.
And that's it, because if you really, if if today we are trying to sort of hit, touch the real spirit of shadow work, then it's really that effort to self-honesty, to see oneself. Most traditions, not even if they're calling themselves shadow work or not, but most reflection traditions are, it's all like, it's like, okay, we're in the school business, and then we have a few reflection days, then they go out on retreats or whatever. It's and it's always like secondary to, but this is the main thing. And so those of us who have sort of journeyed into the depths of this, we've realized that it is the language of everything, and it is, because it starts with shadow work and the dreams. I've been asked a million times, can we do it without the dreams? And it's a no.
Yeah.
Because, right, you cannot do the shadow work without the dreams. It's not optional.
Well, because we are experts at self-deception and manipulation, and don't see that and don't want to see that about ourselves, because we've developed so many ways to run away from our shadow and project it on others and not see it and be in denial. And it's it's hard to give all that up and look
Exactly.
at the truth, and I mean, I know dreams show you the truth. Whatever you're not seeing during the day, it does and will show up in your dreams, whether it's about your past, whether it's about if you're going off, in one direction or the other, and it helps you. I mean, the truth, it may not always feel good, but the truth is the only thing that'll save you. I mean, you can hold on to a lie as tight as you want and as long as you want, but it doesn't help you. It won't save you. Only the truth will.
Exactly. And that's why this is a journey into the core of your own heart, and of who you are. And also, and the first layers of this is obviously trauma, trauma going into to you got to know who you are first, also in terms of your trauma. If you don't know, your trauma and how you run away from it, it's impossible to get to the deeper layers of truth. I also call it the deeper layers of being still, or the truth. They're, I think they're all like synonymous to the thing and to the core. And this is why you're going to sort of, when you're doing shadow work for the in the real sense, you're going to be confronted with all the different ways we run away from things, like schools, education, many science, the trying to know something outside of yourself, it's just to make you run away from your insecurity. It's not true knowledge. Like I was working with someone the other day, and they had schooled themselves really almost, extremely into knowing everything about the narcissist, because they had many relationships with narcissistic men. And the lady was telling me, I was like, wow, that's amazing how much you have studied the narcissist. I said, but even that is a way to run away from your shadow, because you're trying to get all of this knowledge about the narcissist,
Mhm.
but you don't know what in yourself keeps bringing you
Mhm.
into the
Attracting them.
narcissistic.
Yes.
Yes, and so science is also a way to this amassing of knowledge and titles and whatever. This is why if someone really asks what is shadow work, then really it's not knowledge, amassing knowledge about something outside. It's really surrendering to getting to know yourself.
Mhm.
It is a everything in that sense. The law, what we now see as medicine, it's all basically
Outside.
institutions. Yes, it's outside. And while when you go truly inward via shadow work, via a connecting to aspects of yourself, that you normally cut off, deep feelings, that we normally avoid to be comfortable. It takes us into that inner shelter, which is where all these institutions really are. The church is in there.
Mhm.
True justice, you cannot learn justice by studying laws. It
You
it's the
can't you
sh-
can't
it's the
get justice out there either. In the local
exactly.
courthouse. It isn't. It's
No, it isn't.
an injustice system. It
Yeah,
doesn't happen out there.
because the moment you feel that you need to make the other person, bring justice upon the other, it's a project. The shadow work is the inner justice system, because you need to become honest with yourself. You know.
Yeah. And
So
when everybody is containing their shadow, then you don't need laws because you don't need it written on a piece of paper. You need to do this and this because you're doing it from the inside.
exactly, these are all symptoms of a system that turned outside in and started to create these institutions, which now are the very lockdown institutions, because as you said, this everybody knows that the justice system is really an injustice system. Everybody knows that in medicine the cure is worse than the disease,
Mm.
because it's all outside. It's not so the golden grail is that inner sanctum container in ourselves, where all of that comes together. The truth, justice, health, healing, God, and it's very symptomatic that all of that was now projected outside, and people think, I go to some building to worship God,
Mm.
while it's inside. It's the same. I used to work at the university, and I would have these things with the law faculty where I would, say, you guys are, you cannot teach justice in laws. All you're doing is teaching them how to manipulate laws and to not look inside themselves, to keep themselves honest.
Hmm.
This is why the whole system, I believe, is a shadowless system, and has collapsed. In
Yeah.
the whole virus thing, people have made the case that the whole medical system is corrupt. You know, but so we really are without the shadow work, which originates with 2,000 years ago. I speaking the other day to my mother, who is a has been many years in religion. But I was saying, if we received 2,000 years ago, like the message or the teachings,
Mm-hmm.
they weren't about how to go to another planet.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They were about the how to see yourself, how to see the splinter and the beam, and they were about shadow work.
Yes.
There there's no way forward without it, without people being aware of their shadow and their projections.
And I think, some of it maybe is honest misunderstanding, but I think like a lot of it was intentionally misrepresented and altered to keep people from knowing and seeing the true way.
Exactly. I was looking today at a video. It's called Looking for looking for Joey or something. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a documentary about Joseph Campbell.
No, I haven't seen it.
Campbell was like this big mythologist, and he quoted Jung a lot, and he feels, I think he would place himself within the Jungian tradition. But in that documentary, they were showing the different stories of the hero.
Mm-hmm.
But then they brought forward, for instance, the Wizard of Oz and Dorothy and Alice, and I was wondering, the thing is, so all of this is important for what we're trying to discuss today, is that
Mm-hmm.
they don't differentiate between that the hero will go. It goes in according to them in 3 stages or something. But then there's this stage that the hero finally breaks out of the illusion, and then
Mm-hmm.
right, and they don't differentiate, like in their discussion of the Wizard of Oz or in Alice in Wonderland. They're not able to differentiate that, that the hero can go out of the illusion, meaning out of body, but then in the wrong way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They don't differentiate that. They look at all of these stories, as the hero sort of separating from the tribe, undergoing some transformation, and then returning. But for instance, in the case of the Wizard of Oz and Alice in Wonderland, we are literally looking at the upside down shadow work, if you wish.
Yeah, because the rainbow or going down the rabbit hole are flipping upside down. The portal to go
Exactly.
upside down. But those things are everywhere. Like, with most of the world home on quarantine or on some kind of lockdown or quarantine, you see different cable TV channels and things. Oh, we're going to offer, free channels or free movies. And they always have The Wizard of Oz on. Always. It is always on somewhere, some channel. It's always playing. And that's not, a coincidence. They want that program running and running.
Exactly. And that's the thing with the false shadow work, is that it can kind of seem or look very much like the real thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very difficult to differentiate, but it is via cutting off the shadow that they go outside of the matrix, if you wish. Neo choosing the red pill, and in this so-called discovering these higher powers, this is what the whole superhero tradition is. It's all cutting off the shadow to get some super state.
Well, but that's how they can sell it that way, because there are supernatural, if you want to call it that, powers or abilities or things in the right side up, but it's different because it's containing the shadow, and it's not doing it for the powers. It's just sort of a byproduct of being in that state, versus, it's very seductive to have supernatural abilities and abilities to travel in time, or abilities to travel to different dimensions. That's very, very seductive, and it becomes like this drug that it's hard to give up. But if it's the upside down superhero way, it's easy to get caught in that.
Totally, and that's the thing. What we've been seeing is that all of these superhero movies are real in the sense that they guide, or let's say misguide, these kids into becoming superheroes. And in their dreams, they literally have these powers, but it's all in service of a sort of a upside down program to cut off the shadow. So slowly, through many years of doing this, we've come to realize that the whole thing, and if you realize that in Jerusalem, the main teaching was about the shadow. We can really state that it was all about the shadow. So then obviously the main program to stop the human story from fulfilling itself, meaning finding the true self, will be anti-shadow work. And so what I have been amazed to discover is that all of these superhero movies, they literally are happening in the dreamscape. And so what Jung called the collective unconscious, there seems to be like an upside down version of that, within which these anti-selves or superheroes exist. And these movies are really about that upside down collective unconscious. And so all of these movies are real, and these kids are sort of programmed into becoming superheroes. And within that dimension, they do have these powers, but it's all upside down. So these movies are literally depicting and programming people. And these superheroes or what have you, they live and work in that dimension, and that dimension does interface with the dreams of people. So if you don't have the right shadow work in order to shield yourself and your dreamscape, that stuff comes in. And that's why I think a lot of the messages in the Bible haven't been decoded. I think, if I'm not mistaken, there's even a scripture that says that only at the end of time, that the true meaning of it all would be revealed of these scriptures. But there is a scripture that says that we fight not flesh and blood, but principalities in higher places. So there is a very strong case to be made that dimension there is a war via that, dimension the collective unconscious upside down for your mind, for your
Hmm.
mind. And people they don't even know that there is a war for their mind happening.
Well, because a big part of it is in that scripture too. We're not fighting the flesh, but that's where all the focus is on distractions, causing disruption, causing the focus to remain on the physical, and that's the wrong the we need to be looking inside. We need to be looking at our dreams and seeing the truth about ourselves and where we're at. And no matter how painful it is, we have to look at that so that we can make a choice and move out of there if that's not the dimension we want to be in. But without looking at it, ignoring it or staying in denial doesn't help us.
And that's exactly it, because the main effort, if the war is psychological and not flesh and blood, psychospiritual, then the whole thing changes, and then we realize that the main effort is to keep people focused outside of themselves, to keep them distracted. People don't even know the levels of meaning in distraction, that it is in and of itself a way to control your mind.
Mm-hmm.
So with the to keep your attention outside of yourself, while shadow work is really a form of reflection, self-reflection, to keep your attention on yourself.
Inside,
And
yes.
exactly, so with the virus and all of that, and then how they're keeping everybody focused outside of themselves. That's the whole thing. And as you said, that only your dreams will show you what's really going on. Because if we've really understood what shadow and projection is, it means you cannot look outside beyond your own projections with the very observation hardware. So only your dreams will show you what is really happening beyond projections. This is why to keep people in projection is so powerful, to mislead them. But then also, your dreams will show you where you stand with your shadow and yourself, but also collectively. Like somebody sent me a dream today, and the gist of it was that you know the modern nature was not was basically closing the book, if you wish, on the whole thing, and stopping the whole insanity. And then they saw a flood. The water started to rise, and the only spot that people could be safe was on hills and mountains. Everything else was covered with water. And the thing with that, you see the interpretation of that this is what people will dream if they somehow allow themselves to see, what is really going on. And the water is the shadow. It means that there was a millennia lasting program to shut the shadow out, because that's the only thing that brings justice to the person, and that it's coming back, that all the scriptures speak about the return of it, and that you will be safe to the degree that you can allow your shadow to return to you, which will be, for instance, getting more symptoms, feeling, all of that coming back, more sicknesses in the compensatory sense. And that will put, so the mountain is where you are okay with your shadow. And it's only in the dreams that we will see what's really happening, you know.
Yes. So I think the most, or one of the most important things of our conversation today is that you cannot do real shadow work without consistent dream work, because there are so many ways that we can manipulate and deceive ourselves with the conscious mind, because we've all become experts at it, every one of us. And so we have to see via the unconscious, and the dreams give us a doorway into that, to look at it.
Yeah, let me just follow up on that a second, because this is so important, because the problem is the conscious mind. The problem, so if you want to individuate or do a shadow work only via the conscious, it will be it will falsify it. The conscious mind will use this stuff.
It'll be an act, a performance of it.
It fully, so only the dream will take us beyond the perspective of the conscious and into allowing the unconscious, to speak, so to speak. Because the conscious mind, let's say, that it's basically the spokesperson for the ego complex. It will not, if it's a spokesperson of the ego, and the ego needs to, make room for the true self to come back in. Obviously, the conscious mind is not going to collaborate with that, with putting its own, what it's serving, to put it in the back seat, and allow the self, the front, the driver. That's, so the conscious mind is just one pole of the two. The shadow will be the other side. And only when those two connect, you get the driver and the self, which is the true self. So yes, the conscious mind alone needs to, as we're sharing this, people might get a feeling of, the deeper aspects of this, because you really need to learn to sort of not allow the conscious mind alone to run the show.
Mm-hmm.
And always be looking for the compensation, always be looking for the shadow,
and be open to the feedback, whether it is compensation, whether it is symptoms in your body, whether it is your dreams telling you something that you didn't think you were, or you didn't want to be,
Yes, exactly. So that's why it's really stepping back from the projections, from the observations, which is what the conscious mind basically is about. And then looking at, at it as looking at the way you're looking, listening to what you're hearing. It's a third person perspective, going beyond the conscious alone. And so that's why a whole lot of the shadow work just remains in service of the conscious and the ego complex. And of course, as we've said so often, the ego is very, very necessary. So the whole new age war on the ego thing is totally another upside down approach, because the ego, we need the ego to navigate the shadow.
Well, it's not getting rid of anything. It's collaborating and working together within.
Exactly, and allowing the ego, by doing what it has to do, it served us to reach, where we reached. And now it has to, help it. And then out of that is born the superposition or supervision perspective that encompasses both poles, The effort of the shadow work is to go in superposition, meaning to between the opposites, to not fill in into what, with interpretations, but to suffer the edge between them, and allow that to take you inward to self. So, and the self is the big redeeming factor, the connection with the self, because that is the infinite in us, where all of these things come together, justice, truth, healing, faith, and that's why so the dream work is an absolute must. And I think we have done the work, and you have also done it, and you understand the language, the meaning. This is something that only when you do it on yourself, when you do it on yourself, you become aware of the meaning of the dreams. It cannot be studied in a book as such.
Exactly. And it's a different kind of learning. It's internal and knowing and feeling within, and that's not at all what schools have programmed us to do.
No, exactly. It's the schools have done the opposite, and this was what the true school was meant to do. To find the inner wisdom, which is the Sophia, and that is the self. The self is made up of that inner wisdom, and so very much in terms of what we're trying to share about today, the darkness. People need to know that there is an upside down version to all of this. One could then, call it like the dark side, but it's not a dark side as an opposite to the self side. This is where it gets completely confusing to many people, because they are not able to to not juxtapose what we have is self, and an absence of self on the other upside down side. The absence of self is like that is what darkness is.
Absence of light.
Exactly. So there is a fake light. The darkness is. I heard a video the other day in which they were literally calling the darkness. They were calling it the black light. But it's also in the whole AI tradition. It's the synthetic light. It's the fake light. So it's not easy. I even, I would dare to say that these type of notions regarding the self and and the different layers, it's very hard to process this if one hasn't done shadow work.
Yes. But in a very quick nutshell, to say that the more that the mind is split and the yin and yang aren't touching and the shadow is being rejected, the more we are rejecting the shadow, the more it opens the door for the darkness. And so in terms of closing the door to that is containing and having the sides touch, the poles touch and connect. And that's the only thing that protects us from the true darkness, evil.
Totally. And because it doesn't sort of fight anything, it is able to just remain in itself. The moment you fight something, this is why all of that superhero tradition of fighting, the evil villain,
fighting the bad guy. Yes.
Yeah, it's upside down, because it's a way to keep you. So that's where you get the controlled oppositions. Because if they keep you fighting the evil villain, they keep you sort of outside of yourself, and the true self doesn't fight the villain as such, the true self is very close in itself,
Well, when it,
and
when we are containing and we're between the two poles, we become invisible to that level of density. They can't touch us. So there's nothing to fight because we can see them, but they can't even see us. They can't get near us.
that's it. All that. So let's say the darkness is like the embodiment, of the black hole, the spirit of the black hole. Sorry. So what the right notion would be that that is a sort of a fabric of illusion. It creates illusions for people, keeps people
Mm-hmm.
trapped in illusions, while the right side sort of destroys illusions. It's the shadow work is basically a process of illusion destruction. That's why the Hindu figure of Shiva is called the destroyer of illusions, and why in the movie of the Avengers they literally made an upside down figure of Shiva called Thanos, who they equated as being the destroyer of universes. That's what they call Shiva. But it's because the shadow work is the process of destroying the illusions. Your projections are illusions, you know? And that's why it's the truth. As you said, it's coming closer and closer to truth because it's a process of destroying illusions. And so that's the true war between light and dark. It's not like light fighting dark, but
Mm-hmm.
the light dispels with the illusions, and the darkness is sort of the creation of illusions. This is why if somebody remains trapped in their projections, the more they keep, the deeper they go in those bubbles, the more it becomes insanity.
Well,
You
they
know,
don't know what's real and what's not because they're so attached to the projection and to that fantasy that they see that whether it's there or not. That's what they see is this fantasy or illusion, and that's scary.
yes, and their process of self gaslighting is to create so-called facts to feed these bubbles, their illusions, to feed their projections. So the deeper we've gone into tracking, what is the nature of the downward spiral, which goes into the black hole. It's a reverse process where people keep finding and trying to manufacture stuff to feed their projections.
Well, that's why the core of this is the shadow work. It's not just something extra or on the side because we have to know what our trauma is. We have to know what our wounds are. We have to know our shadow and really, really know it deeply so that we can know what ways we can be tricked or trapped. If something is really a painful wound and we have a hard time tolerating that, we know that, and we can be vigilant and be aware when that gets triggered or when something comes up. And if you don't know your shadow, you don't know any of those things, and you just get sucked into it and quickly spiral down. And then when you're down there, it's like in the Percy Jackson movies, the Lotus Hotel, and it's just illusion, and you get stuck there, and again, that's also beyond space and time. There's no sense of time, and you're just lost.
No, exactly. This is why, we cannot emphasize enough that without, your shadow work, which your dreams will take you step by step back towards into all of the major traumatic events, that have occurred in your life, to heal them. Without that, and without one going to the very core and essence of one's, hurt and shadow, we're not able to see how we keep creating the shadow projections. We keep trapped in these reverse spirals, reverse loops.
So it's like building a house, and your shadow is the foundation. You have to have a solid foundation. You can't build a house without that grounding, that solid support. You need your shadow. There's nothing else without it.
That's it, and that's why all of the new age and all of the fake spirituality, has amounted to nothing, because there is no foundation, there is no.
Because they want to concentrate on the higher spiritual whatever, and that's just floating away because there's no foundation. There's nothing to
Yes.
ground you. And that's
And in all of these movies where you see people floating and flying and all of that, it's all upside down, going out of body
yeah.
by containing it, the whole thing. But in the upside, it's a plastic container, it's a fake container, and it looks very much like they try to make it look extremely a lot like shadow work, because they will tell you, uphold the opposites and stuff like that. But they're not telling you that you need to uphold the opposites in a state in which they can connect to each other. Because if you uphold opposites in a state where they're too extremely opposing to each other, it will be the very vessel for the upside down, out of body stuff, you know which, by the way, people are like selling as if it's all good. There's so many upside down, out of body trainings. There's so much lucid dreaming trainings. All of that is out of body, upside down, out of body stuff work. If you contain the opposites where they are not close to each other, it will sort of push you out of your body, because they cannot mesh. That's the oxymoronic state that is the container for the false self. Which is nowadays being looked at as that self with the capital S that everybody wants to achieve. Which is in the super soldier, the superhero, the all of that. But it is the anti-self.
Yes. All right. Well, I appreciate you taking time today to have this conversation. I think it's an important one, and thank you for your insight and contributions.
Yeah, and let me thank you very much for that. And I wanted to also say that I want to thank you very much, Meredith, for this conversation. I think as we're having it, I think we should actually do this more often,
Mm-hmm.
because I think there's so much that people need to hear about this in such a format.
I think the format is good because it was just a conversation, not scripted, not planned out, just what
Right,
comes out. And whatever
right.
comes out is what needs to come out in that moment. So
And also I want to say, I don't know if this, but I want to recommend you, Meredith, as one of the few people that I know of, that has really done the work and that is really able to work with others, as we've been speaking, that after Jung, everything went haywire, after von Franz, sorry. And we've focused on how important this work is, and this is really what the flood is in Matthew 24, and the only way to get to those mountains is the shadow work, the shelter, and you are one of the few people that I know of who has done this and who is able to help others with this, and so I wanted to thank you, and it's wonderful to have a conversation like this with somebody that is so profoundly connected to this stuff and has done it themselves, and that really knows, it's a joy to have done this with you.
Thank you. And thank you for your kind words. I appreciate very much. And I have done it, and it just, the truth and the dreams aren't always pleasant. Sometimes the truth hurts, but I understand that there's no other way that's real. There's no other way to reach your true self. There's no other way to reach heaven on earth than via the truth and via the shadow. And so I am committed wholeheartedly, doesn't even touch it, but with all of my being, committed to this work and the shadow and the unconscious and the self. And I just see how important it is. There's no other way.
Let me just add to that shortly though, but this is what makes you, special. And also, it's not many that will totally and fully, get this at this level. And that's why I wanted to add to that. Look, the Jungian, I want to really say this though, the Jungian tradition is not something, that you can go get a degree in as such. It's a spiritual lineage, it's a lineage that is passed down from generation to generation in the same way the indigenous they pass on their sacred knowledge traditions. This is not done just by a diploma, especially not given the fact that Jung was boycotted and sabotaged, and there was a real effort to stop his lineage. So it's very special. Those of us, who I believe have been chosen to pick this up, very special. This only goes by transmission, spiritual transmission, and you are definitely one of them, of us now here to help others, and so this is the beginning maybe, but we need to keep doing this, and the people need to know, who you are and and how you can help very, very much in this work now.
Well, thank you. Okay. Well, we'll do it again soon.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.